Joining us now, Tommie McNeil, our senior correspondent live in Richmond, covering the Capitol like a glove. Tommie, good to have you.
I'm here.
All right, man. Okay, let's roll. Minimum wage, the Democrats making a push for this. Tell us what's happening.
All right. So right now, there were 3 bills submitted to enhance and increase the minimum wage in Virginia from $7.25 an hour. Right now, a bill that seemed to get momentum was a bill by Delegate Marcus Simon. What this does is it raises the wage incrementally to about $15 an hour by the year 2023. By July, the first raise would be to about $9 an hour. Next year, we'll move up to about $10 an hour. Now, I asked yesterday Delegate Simon about this because, there are many arguments against this. There are those who say that it, raises costs to businesses and consumers. It may force automation at some point. It de-incentivizes people from pursuing skilled labor positions, and the list goes on and on. Well, I asked him about all those arguments, and he says, in talking to him, he pushes back on all of that. He says he thinks that, it will impact some businesses, but because there's a measured approach, businesses will have time to adjust to this. He says mom and pops with fewer than 5 employees will be exempt from this. So all those mom and pop small businesses who say, I can't afford this, this won't impact them. On the question of whether it will force automation, he says, he's looked at other states. He's studied other states like West Virginia, Maryland, who have either considered or passed similar legislation. And he says that he has seen automation, but he doesn't think this is a cause and effect. He thinks that that's happening because of technology. Overall, right now it's about the current wage is about $14,000 a year. By the year 2023, it would be more like $31,000 a year if you're a full-time employee. And the argument here is that, if you're a business planning to hire someone full-time, there's no excuse to want to pay someone $14,000 a year working full-time. There are lots of people who have different circumstances. They can't work, they can't live, they can't buy, they can't contribute to the economy, and it just makes common sense as far as he's concerned.
All right, so what would the first tier of the increase be? $7.75 to $9?
To about $9 an hour, yes.
And that would be when? Like immediately?
That would be by July.
Okay, by
beginning
July.
Of the fiscal year.
Right. So if you're making $7.75 now, the minimum wage in Virginia, so there's a federal minimum wage at $7.75. So the way this would work, Tommie, and explain it so we understand it, is that if this passed and the governor signed it, that if you employ somebody in Virginia, then you would have to pay them a minimum of $9 an hour, right?
Of about $9 an hour, yes. Mm-hmm.
So that would supersede the federal minimum wage, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, good. So what chances does this have of getting out of committee?
Well, that's the other thing. It's been, and that's one of the issues that we'll talk about in a little bit. He says that it's been referred to the Rules Committee, which is the committee that Speaker Cox chairs. He says, and a lot of times when a bill is referred to committee, it could be put on ice. We don't hear from it anymore until the following year where it's reintroduced. But he thought that it was very interesting. The Democrats are talking about several bills that have been referred to Speaker Cox's committee. He says he doesn't know whether or not this has been referred to that particular committee because it will be used as a bargaining chip later in the session as they talk about budgeting. Republicans have talked about boosting the economy, not necessarily raising the minimum wage,
right.
But perhaps this is one of the tools that Democrats can have later on as a bargaining chip. So he's optimistic in that regard.
All right, so it's going to be tough to get Republican votes for this. Everybody knows I'm in favor of a minimum wage increase, and I'll get 100 hate mails on Facebook and all that. But I believe, if you look at $9 an hour, if you can't pay your employee $9 an hour, you probably should be in business. I take a very different view than the typical Heritage Foundation, white paper, conservative. But again, they're all funded by people that want cheap labor. And, if you can't pay your employee $9 an hour, you got a bigger issue than anything else. So, I haven't run the numbers on it, but I'm generally in favor of this. But that's just my economic view. How does this play into Governor Northam's overall plan, G3 plan?
Yeah, this is the 3G plan that Governor Northam talked about prior to him being inaugurated. He talked about it on his Monday night. And this is get skilled, get a job, and give back. And I asked the delegate whether or not he thought that this coincided, that it worked with it, did it work against it. And he says that he believes that it works with it. In fact, the Democrats plan on rolling out a plan today, and I think this is probably going to be part of that and how they'll work together. And just a little bit of background on the governor's plan. This is a plan to pay tuition and fees for any Virginian who wants to pursue a credential in a high-demand field. After they've done that and they've acquired a job, then they would then commit 1 year of public service to the state of Virginia. So what Simon says is, listen, we have one group of folks who work. They're not necessarily skilled laborers. In fact, they aren't skilled laborers. However, they still need to make a living. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, if you've got programs out there that help them transition into skilled laborers, this gives them another tier, another opportunity to enhance their quality of life. And in addition to that, he says that this will also incentivize other businesses to pay skilled laborers more.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see. It really puts the Republicans here in a very tough situation, because if they're voting in opposition to it, that just puts them in a tough place. So, Tommie, we'll see how that plays out. Now, you're talking a little bit yesterday about the Rules Committee, so I want to talk about that for a second. How does this tie into the whole Rules Committee deal?
Well, again, the Democrats are saying that there are, you talk about scuttlebutt a lot, and this is one of those things that they've been talking about specifically yesterday. Why are Democratic bills being referred to the Speaker's Rules Committee? And they're looking for answers. We've been talking about rules pretty much since the beginning of session, or the specific committees since the beginning of session. And this is one of the questions that keeps popping up. Why? And they also talk about proportionality. So, they say that because there was a wave of Democrats who came in this session, in the past, they had a higher percentage of Democrats who were serving on the Rules Committee, but because there are now more Democrats in the legislature, that proportionality has changed. And again, the question was, why weren't more Democrats placed on the Rules Committee? It almost sounds like to them, according to them, that, some of these bills are being referred to this particular committee. It's stacked with Republicans, and any bill that Republicans don't want to see advance will die in rules. Mm-hmm. Don't know if that's the case or not, but that's what's being discussed.
Well, that's exactly what they do in Washington. I mean, that's exactly what the Republicans do in D.C., is anything they don't want, they just dump in the rules in the middle of the night, and it goes into a black hole, and it's never to be seen again. And, of course, the chairman of rules is the most loyal person to the speaker. And so there's a bunch of things that Republicans, the Freedom Caucus and others have attempted to do. It gets to rules, it dies, it never sees the light of day. So, look, they're taking a page out of the swamp book, right? No question. All right, we got to get to the Dominion bill. Chap Peterson, as you know, holding a hearing the other day looking to eliminate all donations from Dominion Energy to all candidates. Look, if you're Dominion, why wouldn't you say, okay, let's just ban the damn thing. I can save a fortune. I don't have to give anybody anything. How's this playing out?
So right now, this is the Senate Bill 1349. This was passed in 2015. The background on this is it's a bill that repealed some of the protections for people. I won't say repealed protections, but the law was to protect consumers, whether it's Appalachian Power, whether it was Dominion Power customers. And the SEC would then review what Dominion and Appalachian, their profit margins, and decide whether or not, or what, if anything, consumers should be refunded.
Right.
3 years ago, what happened was that there was a bill because of the Clean Power Plan.
Right.
It was believed that some of these carbon emission regulations were putting a hurt on some of these utility companies. So, to protect the utility companies and protect the consumer, in other words, in Maryland and some other places, rates were going up. They were skyrocketing. So they wanted to protect the consumer.
Right.
That's what the Republicans and those who signed on to this bill say. That's their argument.
That was the Wagner bill. That's the bill that Frank Wagner was a great compromise.
That's correct.
And said, we're not going to do the audit, but in exchange for that, you're going to hold rates for extended period of time because we don't know what's going to happen. Therefore, you can plan it. All right. So we've all gone through that. Now, where are we with this now, right? Because now you got like Chap Peterson and others saying, well, look, there is no Clean Power Plan. Trump got elected. That's gone. They're saving hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. Meantime, there's no refunds going back to the people, and it's now a bad deal. And then you got Wagner saying, well, we made a deal. A deal is a deal. So where do we go from here?
Well, right now, and this was part of the debate yesterday, part of the discussion yesterday, Delegate Kilgore and Delegate Sam Rasool got into a back and forth about this, and Delegate Kilgore says, listen, we're working on this. This is not something that is dead in the water. This is something we understand that some adjustments need to be made. We can fix this. So don't say it's corrupt, as Delegate Rasool said yesterday, that this was something that was corrupt. This was something that we put in place to protect the consumers, to protect the power companies. But now that certain things aren't happening, we're working on this legislatively, and we'll see what happens during this session.
All right, so basically it sounds like the Republicans are working on a compromise. Look, this was certainly not a corrupt bill, okay, Tommie? I mean, this was, when Frank Wagner, who's chairman of Commerce and Labor, put this together, everybody thought that the Clean Power Plan was going to go forward. That was good. No one had any idea what the cost to Dominion Energy would be in complying with this, right? So Wagner, he had a pretty good idea. Let's hedge our bets. Let's make a deal. And therefore, we know that we can plan on an energy cost. And if the Clean Power Plan went through, the other end of the argument of it, if Clinton got elected and the Clean Power Plan was in full force, and it cost Dominion more money than they thought, nobody would be going back to them and saying, well, now the deal's no good. Dominion's not making enough money now. We have to go back on it. Nobody would do that. So it's like kind of, my position on this is you make a deal, you live with the deal. Now, though, other people are trying to change it. I get that. All right, Scott Servell put in a hands-free bill for Virginia. So if you're driving in the car, you got to put the phone down. Maryland has it. New Jersey has it. Washington, D.C. has it, but it's never seen the light of day. They can't ever get it out of committee. How's that look?
Well, Serville's still optimistic about this. This is something that not only Senator Scott Serville has pushed, but in the past it's been pushed and supported in the House. Delegate Rich Anderson, who's no longer serving, he lost in this last election. He's also been trying to push some type of hands-free legislation. The problem is that right now to be stopped for distracted driving, it's a secondary offense. That means that law enforcement would have to have a primary offense, something more serious to pull you over for before they can then start to say whether or not you were texting or driving, whatever. Servo wants to make this a primary offense. Law enforcement, it's a law enforcement community that's critical of this because they don't want to be peering in people's cars while they're driving down the road and trying to figure out whether they were texting or driving, whether they were pushing a button on their music or iPhone or whatever. They don't want to have to decipher what's going on in the car at 70, 75, 65 miles an hour.
Right.
and then have to go to court over this. So that's the reason why it really hasn't seen the light of day since it's been introduced. But again, we've got situations where people, you and I both drive back and forth to Washington, D.C. Doesn't take anything to look over and see someone is distracted driving, whether they're on the phone, whether they're shaving, and we're seeing a lot of people who die from it. So this is something that lawmakers, both on the Republican side and the Democratic side, said that they're going to continue pushing forward until they fix it, they get it right, until they're in conformity with places like D.C. and Maryland.
All right, that's it. We're out of time. I want to thank Tommie McNeil for being with us, our man in Richmond, our senior correspondent. Tommie, thanks. Great update.